be more open-minded and less dismissive of new things that are happening, because that's the crazy thing about exponentials is that they just get faster and faster and faster. So things are going to come up and feel weirder and newer all of the time. And you could either just say like, no, like hopefully it goes back to the way things were, like this is silly, or you can at least try to learn and have some fun in the process. And like maybe there is a business there, and maybe there's, some spark of another idea for something that you might be able to do.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Creator Business Show. My guest today is Packy McCormick from Not Boring. He is famous for saying that he's going to make $1 million on his newsletter, Not Boring. And we talk about NFTs, we talk about fringe communities, we talk about curiosity, and it's a really great conversation. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy it. Well, Packy, thank you so much for joining us on the Creator Business Show. I'm really excited to be here with you today. I was actually checking out your deep dive on Solana that published, was that yesterday?
That was Monday morning.
And today is Wednesday. Okay.
Wednesday.
Today's Wednesday.
I never know either.
Yeah. We are both fathers of young kids, so it's
just trying to survive.
It's a whole job. Yeah. It's a job in and of itself. So, thank you for making time. We are here to talk about creator monetization. You are a creator's creator, I would venture to say. And so it's just really cool to get to have you here. You're also a big crypto enthusiast. NFTs are the topic du jour. So I'd love, after we talk about you a little bit, just to kind of get the background. We can go a lot of different ways, but I think that it'd be really interesting to talk about how creators are using crypto and NFTs today, what could be possible, and what we'd like to see. So why don't you just kick us off, kind of give us the background. Who are you? How did you find yourself here today? And, what are you excited about right now?
For sure. So thanks for having me. It's weird to call myself a creator still. I've only been kind of a creator for about 15 or 16 months. I, grew up outside Philadelphia, went to Duke, studied econ, did finance, worked at Bank of America, Merrill Lynch. So it was like very much on that traditional finance path. Ended up at a startup after that called Breather. Was there for 6 years, which is a very long time. And so I've kind of accidentally, I like risk, but I've accidentally kind of found myself in these very safe-ish situations and very comfortable situations. Then I was thinking about starting something after leaving Breather, and COVID hit. And so I had, no other real kind of assets or prospects. This was like the very beginning of COVID, except for this little newsletter that I'd been writing on the side for a year that had grown from 0 to 400 people over the course of a year or something like that. Very much a side thing. And then just decided to go all in and see if I could grow it and make some sort of living on it, or make enough of a living that I could then buy myself time to find the dream job or whatever. And 16 months later, I'm now, writing this newsletter. We have 70,000 subscribers now, and a small venture fund as well. So kind of the things that I'd want to be doing if I retired, or, writing and investing, I get to do professionally now. So I feel very lucky that things have worked out the way they have.
That's fantastic. Let's actually take one small step back. You were at a startup for 6 years, Breather. Now, I'm familiar with Breather. Why don't you explain what Breather is? Because I think you might have dodged a bullet by leaving when you did pre-COVID.
Yeah, it was not a COVID-proof business, unfortunately. So Breather was a network of on-demand meeting and workspace. So it started out with 150 square foot, tiny little spaces that you could rent for as little as half an hour to just take a nap or go get some work done or have a coffee meeting, or kind of do whatever you would do with a small space anywhere in the city. That's what attracted me to the idea in the first place. I was in investment banking. I'd have some downtime and I'd like literally just go nap in a toilet stall or something. And so I was like, oh man, the idea of having something right next to me that I can just unlock with my phone, get access to, and have to myself with nobody else for an hour, that sounds perfect. And so went there, was our New York City general manager, and kind of grew that market up, became our biggest market, grew a team there. And then was promoted to VP of experience. So I oversaw all of our real estate operations, customer care, design, research, a bunch of other stuff. I had a 150 person-ish team of amazing people, which is probably what kept me there as long as I stayed, was that I really loved the team that I worked with. We transitioned kind of during that period from just these little meeting spaces to full workspaces that a team could rent, 12,000 square feet, 100-person team for 2 years at a time. So literally in the same app, you could book an hour of space or you could book 2 years worth of space. So it was a really cool model. I think we've obviously made plenty of mistakes, or Breather would still be around and doing better. But then when COVID hit, people were not booking small meetings or short-term office space really as much as they had been in the past. Yeah.
Wow.
Surprisingly.
Surprise.
Yeah. Surprise. Luckily, I'd gotten out in the beginning of, officially beginning of 2020, really end of 2019. But I think it was probably time for that business to go somewhere else. And it ended up at Industrious, which is a company that actually is in the same kind of general space and did a lot better because of the way they set up their business model. So it found a good home at least.
Oh, did it exit to Industrious?
It did.
Well, okay, enough shop talk from us startup guys. But I'd be curious, were there any lessons, or what experience did you take from investment banking to then working in a startup and now to being a creator? Even if it's only been a year and a half or so, like what's the common thread? What did you take from the last experience into this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing that has kind of gone through each of the different phases of my life, except for school for whatever reason, but I was like a cross country runner in high school. I did investment banking out of college. I did, was the only employee in New York at Breather for the first year. So I was literally 7 days a week going out and cleaning spaces on a Saturday night and, all that kind of stuff. And then writing is now a 7-day job. So I think like kind of big thing that's gone through all of them is just no matter what you're doing, kind of just this work ethic that it takes to do well in any one of these things. And that's not maybe a super, generalizable lesson or something people can take away. But I think like at least me from the outside would look at creators and be like, oh, that looks fun and easy. And it's actually, this might be the hardest job I've had yet in terms of like the actual hours of actual work that I need to put in. Like in investment banking, you need to stay at the office, but maybe you're not working the whole time. This is just like a ton of hours every week of work. And so I think that's probably the most surprising similarity to me, I guess, across all of them.
Nobody's buying you dinner if you stay past 8, right?
No. It all comes out of the not boring budget.
All right. So let's talk about not boring. What was it when you conceived it? What would you describe it as today?
Sure. So there was no real conception of it. So because I was in that last year of Breather where I realized that I'd been there maybe a little too long and needed a new thing to at least wrap my mind around, took a writing course called Rite of Passage. As part of that, we had to start a newsletter as one of our assignments and get people to sign up for it. And so I think 20 people maybe read the first version of it. And it was like, here are 5 things that I read, on the internet this week. It was called Per My Last Email back then, and kept that going kind of weekly over the course of a year. And then when COVID hit, the thing that I was actually trying to start was called Not Boring Club. So I took the name from that when that died because it wasn't going to work with COVID. It was a social club essentially. And took the name, put it on Not Boring, and decided I really like writing about tech and business strategy and all of that, but Ben Thompson does it really well. So I'm going to add memes and, jokes and combine it with pop culture and like just do it in a way that Ben Thompson couldn't do it in because he's like too, good at what he does. And so he wouldn't stoop to this level. So let me stoop to a lower level than he would to at least like kind of stand out from the crowd a little bit. Over the past year, it's kind of evolved from, directly being business strategy and tech and pop culture to keeping that same tone, but talking about a bunch of different kind of tech companies. I'd say 99% tech companies and themes, and maybe the odd non-tech public company thrown in every once in a while.
And in a not boring way.
Ideally, I've really kind of painted myself into a corner with that name where if I did write anything that was super boring, I think I'd lose a lot of people.
Okay, so I like to move around backwards and forwards. Let's talk about Rite of Passage and David Perel for a second, because, I actually just completed On Deck Course Creators. A lot of the people in my cohort were people that had done Rite of Passage before. So why was that so one, what is Rite of Passage and why was it so influential to you?
Sure. So Rite of Passage is a 6-week online writing course where, I think it's the model du jour is the cohort-based courses. And it was kind of one of the early cohort-based courses where, call it 150 people sign up. I was early, so it's 50 people in my cohort sign up, and then twice a week show up to live sessions and then go into breakout groups. There's, a chat room. There's all these sorts of things where you're learning together as a community. For me, that was the big thing. Like, I don't know if my grammar got any better. I don't know if I became like a technically brilliant writer and not a technically brilliant writer. And certainly like that course wasn't about that. It was really about finding what you were passionate about writing about, figuring out how to tell what was interesting to write about, thinking about a little bit about distribution on the internet, but most importantly, having to show up twice a week to those small groups of people that you got put into and not be the asshole who didn't show up with something done when you had an assignment. And so it really built that kind of habit of consistency in kind of an environment of people who are all trying to get to the same place or trying to do the same thing. And I think that was super powerful. So it's been easy to kind of keep up that weekly routine since then because I was able to develop it there.
And now that you have a very public newsletter that is a business, do you have a cohort of other newsletter writers? Do you have some kind of not boring club of other publishers that kind of keep you accountable? Obviously, besides the thousands of people that are reading and paying, let me ask it in a more open-ended way. To whom do you consider your peer group as a writer today, now that you have a large following and this is a business?
Yeah. I don't know, there's a bunch of people and I don't even like naming names because there's so many people I think are in this kind of group of people.
Let's roast some people. Come on.
Yeah. There's some people I just absolutely can't stand. I'm kidding. The Every guys, so they did everything. It's now Every. Dan and Nathan started in the beginning of COVID, just when I was starting out. This is like a huge break for me to just be able to get into this group of people. They started a Telegram group with 20 or so at the time, other people who were writing newsletters somewhat related to business. And so it was like people that I respected, those guys included, Lee Jin, Webb Smith, Jared Dicker. I remember like coming in the first day and being like, oh my God, like how did they invite me into this group? It's amazing. And so I think having that group of people in the beginning was really, really helpful. The Telegram group's gotten less active. They're now running a full successful business with their own stable of writers and all of that. And everyone's kind of doing their own things. But I think that was a really important kind of moment. Now, I mean, there's all sorts of just people writing great stuff. I think some of them are, the obvious ones like Mario Gabriel. I love the, acquired podcast guys, and Harry Stebbings. I'd say it's like a little broader than the newsletter that I consider the peer set. Bern Hobart, Webb Smith still, Lee Jin still. And then there's just a bunch of people who pop up every once in a while with these like genius pieces on particular topics that I, really love. And so I don't know, I think anybody who's kind of creating stuff on the internet that makes me think, I would consider kind of broadly the peer group.
And what's the hazing ritual like when you join a group like this?
You just have to write every week.
So we're talking about creator monetization, probably talk about creator burnout at some point. How do you, in a peer group like this, support one another? And what are the kind of issues that come up?
Yeah. So that group has actually become a little bit more informal. I think like a lot of communities end up, and I think this is true of the Not Boring community too, end up just kind of going to Twitter in a lot of cases. So like, I'll interact with all of those people on Twitter now and, share each other's stuff. And there's nothing coordinated. And like, there are also groups of creators that have coordinated groups where they're sharing and liking and retweeting everybody's stuff to get everybody more followers. It's not anything that formal, but it's just having a relationship with these people such that like, you can reference their ideas and know exactly where they were coming from when they wrote it. Or if you see something that they wrote that you particularly like, you can let them know and just give a little bit of encouragement. Like, it is in a lot of cases, unless you join something like Every, like a very solo journey. And so just knowing that there are other people that you can have a call with or pop into at any given point is super helpful, but there's no real formal structures in place there.
Awesome. Okay. I don't think any interview would be complete if we didn't get the quick and dirty of how Not Boring came to be. You left Breather, were not so sure what you were going to do, right? Mm-hmm. And ended up in your in-laws' basement. Why don't you kind of, that's the urban lore. Do you want to kind of run us through that?
That is the urban lore because it's true. So my wife and I were living in a small 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, kind of at the end of 2019, early 2020. Was starting something called Not Boring Club that was an in-person community. You can kind of think of it like Soho House meets college extracurriculars, and just like saying it out loud now, it was a bad idea and COVID saved me from it. But at the time I was like really excited about it. I've been writing a bunch about community, thinking a lot about the whole thing and like how you make it work. And the tough part about being a writer is that you can kind of like justify anything to yourself and write your way into rationalizing almost anything. And so I did that, even though my wife and my sister and other people around me were like, I don't know if this is the idea. I was so stubborn that I was like, no, this is the idea. And then I was having kind of like, onboarding dinners and welcoming people that I'd let into a Slack group and starting in a really lightweight way. And then on March 10th in the Slack group, someone was like, I don't feel well. Like, I'm going to skip tonight's dinner. And then another person was like, yeah, there's COVID. Like, I'm going to skip tonight's dinner. And then that kind of happened and ended up canceling that dinner. And then all the future dinners that we had scheduled. I tried to bring that community online and do events. And like, there's one day that I was sitting in our apartment preparing for trivia night by like making slides where, like we played trivia or whatever on Zoom. And I think 7 people showed up and I was just like, is this what I'm doing with my life right now? Is like doing this thing where 7 people show up to play trivia. And so that's kind of when I was like, all right, I'm just going to put this community thing on the back burner. If COVID ends in 2 weeks, I'll pick it back up. But otherwise, I'm just going to start writing and see what happens. So switch from just kind of doing, link curation to full essays. Partnered up with my friend Tommy, who was leaving his job at Airbnb, to kind of think about how to grow this thing in the beginning and what this was going to become. We actually had an idea about buying and rolling up newsletters and just kind of exploring. Like, this was never supposed to be the actual thing. It was like maybe a lead gen, either for me to get another job or for us to do this other business or like any number of things. And then it just started kind of growing. So it got from 400 to 1,000 people. We launched on Product Hunt and went from 1,500 to 3,000 people. And from there, it's just kind of snowballed where, if I focus on kind of writing fun pieces that also teach people something and explain complex topics as clearly as I possibly can, then people share and it just kind of grows. And the bigger audience you get, the more people there are who might share. And so it does kind of just compound over time. But yeah, the beginning was just about figuring out how to, what I should be writing about every week and sitting down and doing it.
And it's clearly working. One of the, I wouldn't say necessarily audacious, but certainly one of the bolder pronouncements you're known for is predicting that you'll make $1 million this year or in a 12-month period. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And what was the feeling when you actually uttered that out into the universe for the first time? Were you ready to like vomit or, talk about the thought process? Like when you said publicly, I'm going to make $1 million as a newsletter publisher.
Yeah.
I'm going to do this. What were you, what were your thoughts? What were your hesitations,
As I often do, I couched it with like, I think like I might be able to, like, this is my goal. Like, I want to do this. I don't know if I'm going to, we'll see.
But you come from banking, so they're used to big numbers.
Yeah, $1 million is not big in that world. Nor is it big in venture capital now and all of that. But at the time, I don't know, we were down in Miami, of course, because you're in tech, you have to make a pilgrimage there at some point. And I just woke up feeling spicy. I think a piece had done well or something. And I was like, fuck it, I'm just going to say this and kind of see what happens. And the response was so positive to it. And I was like, I didn't think it, I like just doing the numbers. I was like, maybe this could possibly happen if everything goes right. And the amount of people who DM me and were like, I think you're thinking really small here relative to what you can actually do. It was super encouraging that it, like, I'm sure plenty of people viewed it as like, this guy's being an asshole, but didn't say it to me. All the stuff that people were saying was really positive. I think one of the kind of meta points there, like more interesting things on this journey, is that I was not a particularly public person before any of this. Like, I had to get over the fear of hitting send every time, like wondering why people would ever even want to read whatever I wrote. And like, I've said this before, but I have had this idea in the beginning that like every time I hit send, I had a group of friends who were just like in a text group being like, what is Packy doing? Like, who does he think he is sending out an email? And so like that tweet was like, after a many month process of just getting more open about kind of sharing things. And I've noticed, one of the things that I started doing in the newsletter early on when there was like nobody reading it was saying how many people were reading it and how many people had joined that week, and just being open with the thing. So now I say it and the numbers are big, but a year ago when I was saying it, the numbers were like, welcome to the 12 new people this week. And so there's like some consistent thing about sharing the good and the bad that I think just makes people kind of buy in. And I think it's why, individual creators are having, such a good time out there right now in some cases, is that people just like rooting for and following and whatever else other people. And so the more that I can just kind of be honest about the way that I'm thinking and feeling at the time, I think the better.
That's awesome. All right. So let's break apart $1 million here for other people. I think that's awesome that you say it's a small, in the grand scheme of things, for one person, there's quite an upside, right? To reach $1 million. In the grand scheme of things, it's consequential, but there's a lot, there's still room to grow. So, what does $1 million look like in terms of output, in terms of monthly revenue, in terms of profit as well?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because it, for a person, is a lot of money, and it's, maybe it's probably what I'd be making if I had stayed in banking or finance all of this time, maybe a little bit more. But certainly for most jobs, for a single person, that's incredible. For a business, that's a small business, like definitionally a very small business. And so it depends how you look at that boring, whether it's just like me or whether you look at it as a business. But monthly, I guess $1 million divided by 12 is 83,333 or something. So that's kind of the bogey to get to each month.
$20,000 a week.
Just about $20,000 a week.
So is that $3,000 a day?
Yeah.
Ish.
Yeah. That's pretty much what it breaks down to. And I hadn't.
It's what a 7-Eleven makes, right?
There you go. So but the good thing about this kind of business is that my costs are super low. So, I make money in, I guess, 3 different ways at this point. One is just top of newsletter sponsorships, where I write a 150-word blurb on whoever the sponsor is that week, kind of standard newsletter ad format. The bigger moneymaker is I write these sponsored deep dives on companies, which they'll pay to say, like, can you write about and analyze our company? And there's all sorts of rules around that. It's like I thought it was going to be a more controversial model than it's actually ended up being. I get a few people who are like, this is sponsored content, I hate it because it's sponsored. And then, most other people are like, actually, this is really good. And I actually get that because I write about startups often in those ones, and like go behind the scenes and get inside information from the companies. I have a lot of founders reaching out being like, this is actually really helpful that I get to see how this company that's done X, Y, and Z actually got there. So those are the two on the sponsorship side. And then I have a fund that, pays management fees that I'm now reinvesting back into the fund. But, as that fund ages, that'll be a revenue stream as well. So those are kind of the 3 different buckets. I also have a job board on Palette, which makes a little bit. And so I think once the audience grows, there are other opportunities. The challenge and the goal is there's plenty of opportunities to shill stuff that you don't believe in, and plenty of opportunities to overwhelm the audience with just like too much sponsored stuff. So I try to think about like what will actually add value. And if it doesn't add value to the audience, and if it puts me at risk of losing people, then that is not worth it. And losing people's trust is not worth it. But something like a job board on Palette is great because I'm looking at all these companies anyway. I get to say, to the people who are interested in reading about these companies, here's a chance to go work there. And then for the companies, they get to tap into an audience of people who are willing to sit down and read 6,000 words on tech every Monday. So it's like a really aligned thing. And those are the kind of things that I look for as I'm growing the business.
Yeah. So an interesting thing that comes up is $1 million a year of trust of the audience.
Totally.
And trust is priceless. But if you were to put a price on that trust and to break the trust down into, monetizable units, you said it's the top of newsletter sponsorship, it's the deep dives, the job board,
and the fund.
Yeah, that is so cool. So,
and literally the best part is it like kind of ties my hands where all of it falls apart if I go do things where I'm like, here, this company was willing to pay me a lot. I actually don't like them, but like go use that, because then people are not going to click on the next ad. They're not going to buy the product of the company that I write about. They're not going to go work there. Founders aren't going to want to work with me. So like, it seems like this model that's super almost like conflicted, and like if I were a journalist, I would never do this model. But it actually is really, in my mind at least, and maybe this is me justifying again, but fairly well aligned, where like everything comes down to, will this be something that the audience actually appreciates and that I actually believe in? And that's kind of the standard that I hold myself to.
That's wonderful. And I can imagine, as a creative person whose output to the community and the responsibility you have to create high quality content comes at a psychological cost. You want to talk about, can you talk about for a second, how do you go through the creative process? I know that in other interviews I've heard of yours, you say like, is anyone going to want to read this? So how do you psych yourself up, and how do you keep yourself going? You've got a model, but I certainly not going to say that it is vulnerable, but you are the brand, even if technically Not Boring could be run by somebody else. So how do you as the brand get up every day and produce high quality content and, hit send on time so that it goes out on Mondays?
I think that's another one we're having, the bigger the audience gets, the more kind of accountability I feel to making sure that something gets out. Even though like, if I send something at 9:15 one Monday, I send it, 8:55. If I send something at 9:15 one Monday, I'd feel awful. I don't think anybody would care, but I'd feel awful about it just because, that's what I deliver, is something at 8:55 or 9 a.m. at the very latest at any given day. But it is not easy. Like right now it's Wednesday and I have no idea what I'm writing about on Monday. And maybe if I'm lucky, I'll think of something tomorrow and start writing. And this is what happens every week. Luckily, because I've been writing for a while and writing kind of on similar-ish topics, I have building blocks. And so it's not like I'm starting totally fresh on like exploring a totally foreign space, but certainly whatever company or theme or whatever I'm coming into fairly fresh. And so I have to spend, whatever the next 4 days after I come up with the idea, one, just immersing myself as much as possible, listening to podcasts, reading about that topic. One thing I regret and need to get better at is I don't read nearly as broadly as I used to, because it's all focused on whatever I'm coming at that week. But, immerse myself, and then at some point just get to a spot where I feel like I kind of know what the thesis of the piece is and just start writing. And, I think in the beginning, again, it was very much like, I don't know if anybody wants to read this. Now, I at least have evidence for the past X number of weeks that people want to read this stuff. So I feel less bad about that. But it's still like the more challenging part now, I would say, is I'm writing about topics that other people are much more expert in than I am. And so there's definitely still the imposter syndrome coming in and being like, here's Solana, here's this blockchain that I am familiar with and have been following, but like there are people who build on it all day and invest in it all day and all of this, who know way more than I do. And I'm going to get some stuff wrong, but here you go. I'm going to pretend that I'm the expert on this thing for the week. So that's probably the most kind of psychologically challenging piece of it still. And then there's just like the very real stress of the whole thing, right? Like I am, as you can probably tell, like a very upbeat, happy, optimistic person. And still, like I've gone through some of the harder periods, probably like mentally, of my life during this, because there are some weeks where I'm just like, I have no idea how I can get this week done. And like maybe it all falls apart if I can't figure out how to, write something this week, and I'll get like stressful and snappy.
And you have a child.
And I have a child, and like, and so one, that means I have to provide for the child, but then two, it means like I'm probably not sleeping. I want to spend like those in between hours, not just researching, but hanging out with him. And so just like a bunch of stuff that adds up to me, and there's not a whole lot of time, and I need to keep the quality bar at the same level. And so it just gets, I'm not complaining, but it gets stressful for sure.
It's a job. It's your business. What kind of rituals do you have to support your creative process?
Just sit down and do it. I mean, like I need to get, my schedule is an absolute disaster, because writing and investing are like the opposite schedules, where investing is half an hour calls whenever a founder wants, and writing is ideally big blocks of time. There's not really a ritual. It's just like, when the weekend comes, there are fewer meetings, and so I can get up early and just write. And my wife is, awesome about on the weekends being like, all right, I got the kid. You get in there and you sit in this little room with robot wallpaper and write all day. And that's what I do. And then, Sunday, like there normally comes a time around Sunday morning when I wake up and it's maybe 9 a.m. And I'm like, worst case scenario, I have 24 whole hours ahead of me. If I need to stay up all night to write this thing, like I have 24 hours. So I'll figure something out. And so that's kind of it.
So your wife is a huge support. Shout out to her. And do you have a copy editor that you send your work to before you upload it, or how do you ensure the grammatical quality and the just structural quality of the finished product?
Yeah, so I use writer.com and just Google for the grammatical stuff, and then my brother, who is a saint, edits most of my pieces. Sometimes he's a 26-year-old with a life, so sometimes he can't. But for the most part, he'll read it through every time before I send, which is, a hard job in itself because this piece this week was 11,000 words. So on a Sunday night, this poor kid, after like having a weekend, has to sit down at a computer and read 11,000 words that I wrote. But he's kind of my main editor. I'll also have my wife read it occasionally for kind of, like, is this interesting at all? Or where is it not interesting? Where did I lose you? That kind of stuff. My brother like really gets in the weeds, but it's kind of a family affair, and I'm very fortunate that they're willing to do that because I don't know if I would be.
That's awesome. We had talked, okay, I would think it's a stretch to say that what your monetization model is traditional. It's certainly accepted. I'd love to talk about, we were just talking about Solana. We were talking about, in your piece about Solana, they were talking about the NFT drops of the apes. So what do you think in terms of monetization for creators who are publishers like yourself? What do you think the future holds for NFTs and Web3 as new monetization vehicles?
I think it's still so early. I just like experimenting with a lot of this stuff right now. So there are like the major NFTs that are, CryptoPunks or Art Blocks or Bored Ape Yacht Club or Degenerate Apes on Solana. And those are interesting in their own right because they're just these cultural assets that are limited that people, feel the need to own because it gives them social capital and some utility, and there's entertainment, and you can join different communities by owning them. And we actually, joined a party bid as a group of mostly not boring readers, I would say, to go buy a punk ourselves and then have our own little community, and we're writing a story. So like there's all this like really fun stuff that you can do with this like mega IP. And then there's also on the other side, like, I've sold a couple of my pieces on Mirror, Mirror.xyz. It's like a Web3 publishing platform that I invested in and is kind of the spot where writers go to do crypto, and they build out new tools all the time. So I sold a piece as an NFT that gave royalties essentially to all the people that I linked to in the piece. So I had fun experimenting with that. I sold another piece that I wrote called Infinity Revenue, Infinity Possibilities, about this game Axie Infinity, to fund scholarships for people who are playing this game Axie Infinity as a full-time job in the Philippines. And that raised $25,000, I think, or something crazy, because NFTs are an interesting way for people to show that they supported something without putting a sticker on that said like I'm a good person. So that's kind of interesting. But I talked to somebody yesterday who's building a company that's kind of combining music and NFTs, and the way that he described it was like, you're not capturing all of the value under the demand curve as a creator if you're, say, on Spotify, which I'm a huge fan of, a shareholder or whatever, full disclosure. But the chances that everybody who listens to Taylor Swift on Spotify likes Taylor Swift and is willing to pay the exact same amount is tiny. But there's only one way that you can pay, and that's paying the subscription, and then she gets whatever cut based on how many times you listen. And so I think there are really interesting ways to say like, hey, I'm going to support this artist by buying an NFT of a piece of their song early, or even crowdfunding their song early. And so I think what it allows you to do is price discriminate among different fans and give them, at least a digital asset, but maybe a digital asset that gets more valuable over time, or a digital asset that gives you access to special events or a community. The guy who bought my first kind of NFT piece I was emailing with this morning. Like, it's a great way to just like kind of connect with the people with whom, you know, the content connects really well. All that said, like, I think it is so early, and I think it's somewhat difficult for creators right now to think about how to use NFTs to monetize. And I think the big thing that needs to happen is more platforms like Mirror and more products come out that make it easier for creators to use all the different kind of tools, whether that be NFTs or social tokens or even DAOs kind of with their communities. And I think we're so unbelievably early in all of that.
And so without getting overly technical, what are these, abbreviations we've been talking around DAOs, NFTs, et cetera? For a person who is a publisher, maybe coming from a more traditional background, but is now going independent, who may not be into cryptocurrency and blockchain. Yeah. How would you describe an NFT in 1 to 2 sentences?
Sure. So an NFT is a non-fungible token, and it's essentially a crypto token that you can tie to any digital asset to prove scarcity and ownership. So, if you wanted to sell a one-of-one edition of a piece of art or of an essay or of anything that you want to say, like, this is the one that is coming from me, someone can buy and prove that they own that one-of-one. And of course, they can make a copy of the picture and use it. They could read the article otherwise. But I think what it really says is, like, there are people out there who care enough about the work that a lot of creators do that they want to own that one-of-one or that one-of-10 or that one-of-100 that came directly from the creator and supports the creator. So it's non-fungible, scarce, and therefore valuable as long as people actually value the thing itself. And so I don't know, I guess the easiest way to think about it is it kind of gives physical characteristics almost to digital things, or like, imbues the same kind of things that you get from owning a physical thing to digital thing. A DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization, and it's essentially kind of like the internet native C Corp or LLC, where it's just a way of organizing a group of people who have some sort of common mission. So there are communities that have DAOs, and maybe everybody commits to it and owns a little bit of it and votes and makes governance decisions together. And maybe they have a pool of money that they say, like, we want to give to charity, or we want to support the arts, or we want to go invest in NFTs, or, we want to be a loose coalition of newsletter writers who aren't, employed by one organization. We all have too many different things going on to want to be employed by one thing, but we also want to have this shared upside vehicle and this shared kind of resource sharing vehicle. And so it's a really lightweight way for groups to kind of form and make decisions together and help each other out.
Yeah, David Spinks has been talking a lot about community DAO tokens in the last couple of days. I've been following that on Twitter. So we're talking about physical characteristics of ownership in a very distributed way. How do you see today creators taking advantage of this, and how might creators take advantage of NFTs and new models to capture more of the value they create for their audience in the future? I really like what you said about somebody. Sorry to jump in, but if you really like a musician or a DJ, you can support them on Twitch by buying a subscription. So that's one more, small level of engagement. But what are some of the really exciting things you're seeing, and what could you predict?
I mean, some of the ones are just, I think artists are the most popular use case right now, where it just kind of makes sense. If someone like a Beeple, who was just a digital artist who didn't have a following, started making digital art and selling it as NFTs. And so it gives a way for people to kind of not just kind of support the creator, but also kind of like invest in that creator's popularity. So it's less of a, Patreon or Twitch or whatever tip or donation. And it's more saying, like, I want to give this guy money, and I also think that I'm going to benefit either by proving that I own this thing and that I was early on this creator, or maybe other people will appreciate this person later, and so my thing will be more valuable. So on the art side, I think that's one of the main use cases. It's still, again, so early on the other types of creator side, but in my main kind of advice in this would just be to start kind of diving in and experimenting with things. Like, I don't think chances are you're not going to make $1 million off of NFT sales, and you might not make $1,000 off of NFT sales, but just kind of diving in and seeing what's going on and playing around with things, publishing a piece on Mirror, trying to sell it, all those types of things. I think you're just like getting in early on this new monetization model that as things develop around you and as the ecosystem develops, you'll be ready for it. And I think it's just going to be one more monetization channel. I don't think that it means that creators will go from making 100,000 a year to 10 million a year because they NFT'd something. Like I don't think it's that, but I do think it gives you tools to kind of enhance the things that maybe should have been happening or would have been happening otherwise if you had the tools, but just couldn't because of the tools at your disposal. So I think like generally my stance on crypto, and I just got into it again after like selling Bitcoin way too early back in 2013. I just got back into it again. And I think the thing that has been interesting to me is that when it's done right, it just really enhances kind of the natural strengths of the business or the creator in question. So like tokens are really good at building network effects when there are people who feel passionate about a thing anyway by aligning incentives and giving people financial upside. And NFTs aren't going to create a passionate fan base for you potentially. But if you do have a particularly passionate fan base, it could be a way for those people to kind of put their money where their mouth is on that passion. And so it's maybe less about creating kind of new relationships. I think like most businesses and human wants and desires are the same, whether it's like offline, Web 2, Web 3, whatever. And it's more just about giving you new tools to enhance the things that are already there, but maybe not monetizable or not touchable before.
Absolutely. I mean, it definitely harkens back to what you're saying about if you violate the trust of your community by just shilling some company you don't believe in for a lot of money, they're not going to stick around. And the same thing goes with NFTs. Is if you're just creating NFTs because you think you're going to, be a Beeple and sell something for $60 million, unlikely.
Yeah.
People aren't going to stick around. But if you do have something, like Wu-Tang Clan or cult brands that just have staying power over the I'm aging myself. Whatever. It's like I'm 40 and Wu-Tang Clan came out the Return of 36 Chambers came out about 27 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
But yeah, Wu-Tang is like a perfect example of someone who could take advantage of it at this point, and not even take advantage, like give their fans something that they want and are willing to pay for. I think that's a really interesting one.
I think they actually did, right? Martin Shkreli.
Oh, really?
The Pharma Bro.
Yeah.
He bought an album.
Yeah.
For $1 million or something like that. That was a one-of-one press of a Wu-Tang.
I remember that
album. Yeah. So that was an early NFT.
But then there's like, MC Hammer on the other side is just like shilling any NFT project that comes his way. And so like you could tell like it has to fit into what you're doing. In some cases it might unlock like, Discord is actually really amazing. And I hadn't explored Discord a lot because I'm too old and it felt a little too chaotic. But there are bots that I think the Decentralized bot can gate access to different communities based on whether or not you own something. And so you can have communities that are gated by NFT ownership. And so that can be one way to say like, I don't necessarily want a community of 70,000 people because that can get really noisy, but I might sell 100 not boring NFTs that are like the cover art from all the different pieces that I've written. And each time I write something, there's one more of those that goes on sale. And so one more person can come into the community. Like you can do stuff like that, I think, too, that one gives somebody something to show off outside of the community that they own this NFT, but then two gives them access to some particular thing. And you could do that with tokens as well, but without the show off aspect.
Even though NFT and crypto are becoming mainstream, certainly crypto is way ahead of NFTs in terms of mainstream. There was a really interesting article I read in Bloomberg probably about 3 months ago, let's say, where they're talking about how communities like Wall Street Bets are the new counterculture. They're the new punk rock because it's very anti-authoritarian and it's very in your face. But it just so happens to be that, it's creating new forms of mischief and new uncontrollable forces using this Web3 technology. So what thoughts do you have about NFTs as a countercultural phenomenon?
Yeah. So, I think one interesting thing that this is actually, Wall Street Bets is kind of like a DAO without being a DAO, but I've heard DAOs, just to give a better explanation, because I don't know how great my last one was. Like people have said, it's like Wall Street Bets with a bank account. And so like everybody in Wall Street Bets could pool their money and be like, instead of trading individually, we're now a DAO that controls this thing, and we'll vote on what stock we want to pump up next because they have this shared resource and governance that just means that like not every individual can defect, and they're actually working as a group. So that's one way to describe it. So one, it gives tools to kind of coordinate groups of random strangers on the internet. If half the world's population, so 3.5, 4 billion people are on the internet, you can find these like really big groups of people who care about a particular niche and align them in a lot of different ways around that particular kind of interest or topic. And online communities do that. This adds another layer to that, which is interesting. I mean, the other thing is like there are just this whole new wave of crypto millionaires who are just kind of creating this new, it hasn't broken out deeply into the mainstream besides the random article, but certainly in my corner of Twitter, like there are just these random people sitting in a basement somewhere who are now multi-millionaires who own these NFTs and put them up as their profile picture. And I don't know, it's like both counterculture and the new upper class a little bit. Like, were there people who are just like, look, fuck it, I can go spend 1,000 ETH or $3 million on a picture of a rock. Like, I'm going to do that because I can. Yeah. And so I think that's interesting, is that it just like kind of shows, and a lot of these people are pseudonymous, but like shows who the people who've made a lot of money during all of this are.
Yeah. This is maybe too philosophical, but I'm going to ask anyway.
Never.
The crypto rich, maybe they're the French it up a little bit, crypto riche, but people, I remember sitting I went to a crypto party in San Francisco. It was, I'm not even going to try to remember. Like I know what the group was. It was some kind of social impact project in the global South in 2017 or early 2018. Sure, it didn't go anywhere. But I was in the car with a guy and he's like, oh, I was buying, hundreds of ETH at $20 an ETH. And now ETH is 3,000, today's ETH price is around 3,300. So it's a very different profile of who a patron of the arts is, who a mega millionaire is. What impact do you think those people can have on creativity as art patrons, as culture? When you have that kind of resource at your disposal, you have an impact on culture. So how do you see those people impacting culture?
Yeah, definitely not too philosophical. I love it. Again, like it depends how much of this kind of breaks out into the mainstream, but there's this whole generative art movement happening right now where like, Artblocks is kind of the prime example. They'll have artists kind of come on and they'll mint generative art that is essentially algorithmic art that they don't know what it's going to look like. There's different things that kind of influence the algorithm and spit out a different piece of art each time that they don't even control when somebody bids on it. And like some of the stuff is beautiful. Or like there is an audio project that just got swept the other day for millions and millions and millions of dollars, and it's just these little kind of sound clips with their sound waves, and it's just like very internet native art in all of these different cases. And so it's just this new wave of patriotism. Like, it doesn't mean that traditional art collecting is going away, or that a Van Gogh is any less valuable than it would have been before, but it just means that it's this like new group of rich people who can support a new form of digital native art or digital native creation. I still think this is really, really early, but there are people who are looking for different ways to both support and invest, which I think is also a really interesting and, if not totally novel. Like most of the grandmasters in art, most of the money was made after they died. And in this case, a lot of it's just going straight into the artist's pocket, and people in the community are, all about that and really appreciate that. Like something called Super Rare, which is another NFT platform, just did a token drop, and they just tokenized and then did a token drop on a lot of the artists in the community. And so they, made a bunch of people who were just out there making digital art before there was a lot of money in it, at least like gave them enough money to live on for a little while and like just spend more time creating. So I think that is an interesting feature, is that there's money directly going to the artists in a way that, maybe wasn't possible before because you're tying patronage and investment.
And, the next phase for you, going from $1 million creator, which is still pretty awesome, to a $5 million creator, what does the world look like when there are, instead of dozens or hundreds, but thousands or tens of thousands of $1 million creators and $5 and $10 million creators?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Because NFTs is certainly one way to do it, and newsletters, and hopefully we'll be able to do things back in person. And so it's like, if you are in person at an event, it's like, hey, I'm going to drop an NFT for 100 people, but it's going to be $2,000 or $3,000. I can guarantee you, people that I would pay $2,000 or $3,000 to have an audience with. My son and I, we watch this homestead farmer every day on YouTube, and he has his own app called Abundance Plus. So he has gated content and things that you can't show on YouTube, such as, like how to process an animal after it's butchered. But yeah, my son loves him. So whatever price I would have to pay to have an audience with him, if he did an NFT, it's like, well, here's a mug or something, and we got to hang out. So yeah, he could do a few of those a year and make millions of dollars. So,
totally.
In your mind, as one of the more outspoken $1 million creators, what do you imagine a world looks like as a not a multi-million dollar creators? What does that world look like? Whether it's NFTs, whether it's other, revenue models.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it looks a ton different. Right? I mean, hopefully it means that more people create, because there's a path to, when startups became very, very, very valuable, a lot of really smart people went to startups. Now that, being a creator has that kind of upside, or not the same upside, but has real upside. Hopefully more people are going to go out and kind of put their stuff that they want to do and love doing out in the world for other people to appreciate and learn from, and all of that. And so I think that's a good thing. I mean, I'll get philosophical as well, but I've kind of written about stuff like this before. Where, like, I wrote a piece called Power to the Person, where it was all about the fact that, NFTs are one thing that maybe like give you kind of continued ownership of your work, and can incentivize high quality work. And there's all these tools coming together such that like one person should be able to build a $1 trillion company with a bunch of kind of part-time people and NFTs and other technology coming together to make that actually doable. And it's better spelled out in the piece and sounds less like I'm high if you just go read the piece called Power to the Person. But I don't know. I think we're living in this world where, compared to a century ago, a lot of the basic needs are met much more cheaply and easily than they would have been a century ago, certainly a millennium ago. Like, there's more and more time to spend on creative things, both creating them and enjoying them. And so, there was that reaction to that poll of kids in China versus the US and what they both wanted to become. And in China, they wanted to become astronauts and scientists. In the US, they wanted to become YouTube stars. And the reaction was like, oh my God, this is everything that's wrong with the country. But more and more, like, people are going to want to be entertained. They're going to want to learn in new ways. They're going to want things to do with kind of the time and abundance that, millennia of innovation have given us. And so I think that's probably, maybe a reason that, creators are able to do well now, is that, they're filling this void and creating more things for people to do, and new ways to learn, and new experiences to have, in a world in which, like, you don't need to go till the farm from sunrise to sundown. And so there's, more time to get involved and have novel experiences.
Unless that's your YouTube channel.
Unless that's your YouTube channel, and then please, by all means, go to the farm. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just think that, like, I everything gets dismissed as silly or as a toy early on, and then over time it's like, oh yeah, this actually makes sense. And so I think we'll see that happen here more and more too.
Yeah. So, that's a great point you brought up about that survey of attitudes towards career. There's clearly an aspect of sensationalism, which is, oh my gosh, the young people. But then there's got to be an underlying truth about it. The fact that people want to create and consume the creation of other people. And, you're living proof that people will pay for things that make them happy or give them purpose and fulfillment. So, what in your mind is the underlying truth of this poll?
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it too is that I think part of the reaction stems from the fact that people read a poll like that and they're like, oh my God, these are people who otherwise would have been out there solving the world's greatest problems and whatever, who are now going to be YouTube stars. And I think probably what the reality is that just like looking at the numbers of the different types of jobs that people are in, most people are in very boring jobs that like at some point will be automated away, that they're not particularly happy in, that like, other people could do fairly easily. And so I don't think that it's like we're going to have this brain drain where like the absolute best and brightest, like the perfect person to solve cancer is now going to be making like dance videos. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but like I think like it just means that there's going to be a lot of people who are doing boring, replaceable things for other people that will now be doing something that's kind of like unique to them. And they're just the tools in place now to both kind of find the niche of people who cares about that and find ways to monetize that. And so I think that's a really great thing. Like that's kind of, the promise of automation always. And like the fans of automation are always like, well, no, it's good because it'll free people up to do higher level things and more creative things. And that's this happening kind of in real time, but it just like looks kind of sillier or lighter than maybe people would have, expected.
Yeah. I don't know you and your wife's feelings about screen time for your son, but, or your child, but I found a YouTube channel over the weekend. This woman, I want to say she's in Vietnam or China, and she takes these little colored magnet balls and they stick to each other really well. And she makes these elaborate houses. And then she puts her goldfish and hamsters and turtles in, swimming pools. And it's hypnotic. It's geometric. It's absolutely, maybe she's not going to build a satellite, but certainly you can see the human creativity necessary to launch a satellite to space, the forethought and the planning and the art and everything that goes into it. And it's not a replacement for a babysitter, but it's like, I have no problem watching that with my son or letting him watch it. And it's like, it's got to be inspiring. It's like, hey, you're learning math right now. This is geometry.
Totally.
This is really cool. This is geometry. This is physics. This is architecture, all in a digestible 12-minute clip.
I think that's the underrated thing about a lot of this. And I wrote a piece recently about how like just kind of everything compounds. And it's really hard to tell when you're in the middle of something that's compounding and when it's going straight up that it's ever going to keep going that fast, but it like normally does just kind of keep going up and to the right over time. And talked about kind of the technological reasons, which is that, as every time somebody builds a new piece of technology, somebody else can build on top of that. And so all those things compound. The other piece, though, that I think will have like wild consequences is just the kind of widespread different forms of education available to kids these days, where you can go online and learn anything, and you can learn anything probably in a style that fits the particular way that you like to learn and that will engage you and interest you. And so thinking about kind of what this generation of kids like your son and my son are going to learn and then try to do with that learning, like, and the tools at their disposal is like impossible to even wrap your mind around, I think. And so like that, yeah, there's certainly also societal benefit to all of this if it inspires, those 10 people around the world who might be best at building satellites and curing cancer and whatever, who otherwise might have just been bored out of their mind in a local schoolroom, to actually go pursue that stuff. Like that's phenomenal.
That is a really good point, actually, is that somebody might be inspired to do that crazy thing because they saw it first on YouTube, and totally. Not the other way. Not a waste of human potential at all. It's probably really going to unlock human potential.
It could certainly be a waste of human potential if you're like sitting in a cubicle somewhere filling out a form or something that like you don't like doing, or and nobody else can see what you're doing and all of that. At least this is like potentially, if you're finding the thing that you're passionate about, a way to spark some creativity or interest in somebody else, and that's a great thing.
Yeah, even that one-to-one connection. Like I never get tired of saying it, but my brother has a YouTube channel with almost 1.5 million subscribers. And it is a very obscure, to me, kind of animation. And yet people all around the world are tuning in 24 hours a day. I don't know, he has some cryptos and what have you, but that is his job, is to run a YouTube channel. And people are consuming it. And if you wanted to, actually, I should call him about making some NFTs because, if he's not already, clearly there's people that would engage on a deeper level than they are through the YouTube platform today.
100%. And that's so like the internet is just so much bigger and the world is so much bigger than like you can possibly fathom. So the fact there are 1.5 million people who watch what you view as kind of obscure like happens all over the place in these little niches that end up being huge. And it's very cool that we can be matched with the thing that like we really resonate most with versus, growing up in the 50s in America, like you better like your local high school football team because that's what you're doing on Friday night. So I think that's again just a very
there's a tyranny of the understood. Weird, but YouTube and other platforms, like just because you don't understand it doesn't mean there aren't literally millions of people that understand this greatly. I mean, K-pop, for instance, is okay. Well, some people don't seem to see the art in it or understand, but is one of the dominant pop culture phenomenon of the world right now. I lived in India before moving back to San Francisco.
Totally.
Bollywood is consumed throughout the world. It's very family friendly. It's action. It's colorful. You don't have to understand Hindi to consume it. So people do. People consume it in Nigeria, in the Arab Peninsula, throughout the world.
My wife's family is Indian. So I was talking to her dad about it and he was like, yeah, everybody in Russia loves Bollywood, which I would not have guessed.
So there's maybe there's a piece in here or a way that we can close this interview just talking about, it's like, just because you don't know something, just because it's not accepted by you, doesn't mean that it's a toy, that it's not culturally relevant, or that there's not a business in something that you don't understand today.
Yeah, I write way too many words for people to come away remembering all of them. Like if there is a takeaway from what I'm writing about now, it's that. It's, be more open-minded and less dismissive of new things that are happening, because that's the crazy thing about exponentials is that they just get faster and faster and faster. So things are going to come up and feel weirder and newer all of the time. And you could either just say like, no, like hopefully it goes back to the way things were, like this is silly. Or you can at least try to learn and have some fun in the process. And like maybe there is a business there and maybe there's, some spark of another idea for something that you might be able to do. And so like that's the point, I think, of the newsletter when you strip away everything else, is just like approach this with some open-mindedness and like some analysis instead of just dismissiveness.
How do you think people stop being curious? How do you think people stop having that curiosity hat on? And how do you think we can encourage people to be curious again for their own benefit and for society's benefit?
I mean, that's maybe the real trick of crypto, and I haven't thought of it this way, is that like at some point, if everybody else is making millions of dollars off this thing that you've dismissed, like maybe the money will pull you in and make you curious enough to experiment, and you'll see that like it's actually mostly not about making money, and it's mostly about these other kind of social dynamics that are being enabled. So maybe that's one. But I don't know, like I think the lesson on the internet generally is like go find the thing that you are passionate about. And it might be something that is, seems a little bit boring or old or whatever, but you're going to find, groups of, model railway makers, an old hobby, and you'll find like millions of them. And you'll find that person who thinks about it the same way that you do in that group. And so like, I think that's it. It's like less about like, how do you get more curious and more about like, all right, what am I curious about? Like, let's go see if there are groups of people who do care. Cause I think everybody's curious about something. It might just like not feel internet-y, but chances are there's a group of people out there who are curious and passionate about the same thing.
And the algorithm will pull you right in as soon as you find it.
Particularly on TikTok, the algorithm, like within a second, will pull you into the model trains.
I found animal ASMR yesterday.
Ooh, sounds soothing.
So there was a 2-hour video of a dog licking peanut butter off a brush.
Oh,
old dog.
That's amazing.
And then goats eating watermelon and stuff like that.
I'm falling asleep. It sounds so soothing that I'm falling asleep now.
Yeah. Oh, and then there's another one, horses with a salt lick. And they just put their big horse tongues on the salt lick. But yeah, I mean, there's like all of this stuff. And if you love horses, if you love goats, if you love dogs, I think that's an interesting point though. It's like taking the internet out of it and just being curious about something. It's like, just be curious. and it will take you places.
And you can find like there's people who love accounting, and like there are sections of Twitter that are just like, there's accounting Twitter. And so like you can find these groups of people who like care about this thing that you wouldn't even consider a curiosity or passion, but like probably are curious and passionate about because you know a lot about it. So yeah, it's it's just about not dismissing things and going to find your people.
You have to be a little bit discerning though, because the people that were into crypto first, they were like, when there was that crazy bull run in 2017, 2018, my friend who was big into crypto and, got into some projects that, went stratospheric. They were talking about these autonomous zones there was one in Nicaragua, and then they were talking about like an autonomous city thing in the Congo. And I was like, no, this is way too sketchy.
Yeah, that's probably too sketchy.
So you have to be a little bit be curious and discerning is what I would say. Because it's like, are we talking about like warlords and granting title to land in the Congo? Like, not to cast aspersion on anyone, but it's like, it just seemed a little bit too much.
And even in that, though, there are the seeds of something that I am sure is going to happen, which is that people who meet online will form in-person kind of communities and cities and whatever in different places around the world that are, I mean, like it's kind of happening in Miami, right? Where like no tax zone, friendly to crypto. I live in New York where they regulate everything, and I go on certain exchanges and I can't trade because I live in New York. And so people are and will continue to move to vote with their feet on things like that. So if it's not, the autonomous zone in the Congo, there will certainly be things like that happen in the middle of the country or in different countries around the world.
Wyoming.
And so in Wyoming. So, like even in the things that seem crazy at the time, like there's at least the seed of something that will probably be a real thing that many people do.
Yeah, I guess be 1% more curious. And you could be a millionaire in a few years. And if you're 10% more curious, maybe not everyone's going to be a millionaire, but certainly be more fulfilled and more creative and just curious. I think curiosity is a huge underrated virtue.
And it's like a Pascal's wager for sure, a little bit, where Pascal's wager is that you might as well believe in God, because if there's no God and you die and nothing happens and whatever, it didn't really matter. And if there is a God and you didn't believe in him, then you're going to go to hell forever. And so like that is like infinitely bad. And it's not as extreme in this case, but like the upside certainly over the past decade, and then even if you zoom out over the past 50 years, there's been more money to be made and more happiness to be made in being optimistic and curious than there has been in shorting things or being dismissive. So there's a many less extreme, less infinite Pascal's wager happening as well.
That is fascinating. But what if the creators that you follow on YouTube don't want to go to heaven? Then I guess you make a choice.
You make a choice. You find your people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you find your people either way. But that is, yeah. Well, you got a young child, got a newsletter to write. It sounds like need to start putting some paragraphs together. Is there anything else you want to say about, do you want to shill the newsletter right now? Do you want to?
Ooh, yeah, go check it out. Notboring.co.
Awesome. And how can people? So notboring.co. Any other way? Like, what's your Twitter handle? How can people?
Yeah.
How can people connect if they want to pitch you a story idea, or they think there's something that you should tackle next? What are you looking at? What would you like to hear from people?
Ooh. So on Twitter at Packy M, PACKYM. And I mean, I'm always looking for things kind of out at the edges that, like, not so early that there's 3 people who are interested in it, but that really feels like it's at the beginning stages of getting some momentum, whether that's right now. Crypto's been interesting, but there's wild things happening in space and in payments and in, even business software and AI. And so like, if there are things that, are kind of in the early stages of starting to gain momentum, that in terms of both the newsletter and investing is where I like to spend time.
Fantastic. It's been a real pleasure. I just really appreciate you for taking the time for doing the writing that you do, for going through the trenches to get to a place and, being an inspiration to creators throughout the world. So thank you very much for joining us here on the Creator Business Show. And thank you for being.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun.